There were three main goals: to promote liberal democracy in Libya, to demonstrate our resolve to defend protest movements in the Middle East and allow those movements to peacefully establish democracies, and to save lives. And I think none of these rationales has held up particularly well, although time could change that, I think particularly with regard to the democracy piece, and I could be wrong. But my bottom line at the moment is that the odds of liberal government in Libya are long. The demonstration effect in other nations is either non-existent or counterproductive. And from a humanitarian perspective, the intervention seems likely to do more harm than good, at least in the near future. And I think the most likely result of pulling down a weak government like Libya's is prolonged disorder and at least sporadic violence, conditions that are contrary to liberal and humanitarian norms of good, even if they lead ultimately to a better Libya. And to be clear, I'm not arguing that the revolution in Libya failed or that it was unjustified. I think Gaddafi's downfall from his unofficial perch is itself evidence enough that the revolution succeeded, and to me, it seems well justified. What I am arguing is that intervention in Libya deserves neither the adjective humanitarian nor the adjective liberal, at least if you think adjectives should describe nouns' outcomes rather than the hopes that caused their use. So before I get to the three main arguments that I just mentioned, it's worth mentioning a couple smaller arguments that justified our intervention, Western intervention or international intervention last March. One is allies. Secretary of Defense, then Secretary of Defense Bob Gates said last June, basically that our European allies considered Libya a vital interest. And since those allies supported us in Afghanistan, we had to support them in Libya, even though it wasn't a vital interest for the United States. I tend to think talking about vital interests tends to distract more than it illuminates. But I think there's two problems with this argument. First, it's not clear that nations go to war out of alliance solidarity. Several of our allies sent troops to Afghanistan and not Iraq, presumably because they thought one was a good idea and not another, not because they thought they owed us participation in all our wars. And second, nations shouldn't fight wars out of alliance solidarity. That was the sort of thing that 18th century Americans had in mind when they worried about permanent alliances pulling us into needless wars. And it's a reason why alliance treaties make the use of force conditional on certain things rather than just saying we go wherever you go. And this alliance logic for intervention expressed by Gates is, to me, it's sort of akin to saying, officer, I was only helping my friend rob the bank because he mowed my lawn. I think we should have allies for war rather than war for allies. The second minor reason or minor justification for the intervention was refugee flows. The president said in his big speech right on the eve of war last year, or the eve of bombing, that one reason we were doing what we were doing in Libya is that otherwise refugee flows would disrupt nearby nations. At the time, I thought that was a pretty silly rationale for war, but as it happened, refugees from Libya did destabilize a nearby state, except that it was our rebel allies that drove out the relevant refugees, who were Tuareg tribesmen that had fought with Gaddafi and that fled back to Mali, where they helped reignite an insurgency, and then Malayan military officers who were unhappy with their government's response to that insurgency overthrew the government in a coup, which is now civilian rule has at least nominally been restored, but it seems the military is still pulling the string. So thus far, military intervention in Libya seems to have reduced the number of democracies in the world by one.